When you think of recording metal music, there are probably a few things that come to mind. Things like huge walls of giant amp stacks at crushing volume, screaming vocals, thrashing drums, basically anything that isn't the word quiet. Well, what if we don't have any of that? What if we're in a situation where we can't be loud and we don't have the money for those sorts of things? Today we're going to explore that scenario. I've set myself 3 goals that we're going to look into. The first one is to record, mix and master a metal track to a pretty decent standard. The second is to use cheap, affordable equipment that most people will have at home. And 3, we're going to do it without upsetting the neighbours. Let's do this. Now, before we go any further, let's temper expectations here. It's not that it'll sound worse, but it won't sound better. It's just going to sound different. I mean, that's all music is, right? Things just sound different, and it's up to your taste whether you like it or not. So you have to understand, we're not going to get the same kind of sound that you would get in a studio setting, but what sound would we get? Let's find out. Now, let's get something straight off the bat. I'm not really a very good vocalist, but even so, it's pretty hard to get screaming, powerful metal vocals without upsetting the neighbours. So I've opted for an instrumental track here that's led by guitars, as I'm a guitarist. So speaking of guitars, the one I've opted to use here is an Epiphone Les Paul. But really, the guitar isn't too important. Just whatever you've got that works for you is probably going to be fine in this scenario. I'm also going to double track the sound to make it a bit wider, a bit more powerful. I mean, that's pretty common in metal anyways. And for that, I'm using an Epiphone SG with P90s in it just to give the different channel a different sound. Now, arguably, the most important thing here is the amp you choose to use. If you have an amp sim on your DAW, this is going to be a lot easier, but not everybody has those. They're expensive, and for beginners, they're pretty hard to use. So instead, I've opted for a real amp. I've chosen this orange Micro Dark. Now, what sets this apart from other amp heads is it has a headphone output here, and that's going to be really good for us. We don't have to plug into a cab. We can crank this as loud as we want. It doesn't matter. My plan is to just wire up the headphone port straight to the interface and get the sound from there. Let's talk about pedals too. You know, we're guitarists, we buy a lot of pedals. I'm going to try and use as little as possible here to get a good sound. Now, the first thing is, in terms of the way I want the song to sound, I want a down-tuned guitar in drop B. And this just, you know, it's fun. But I'm not the kind of person who can afford to buy a bunch of guitars in different tunings. So if you have that, great. If you don't, I highly recommend you use one of these pedals. This is a drop pedal by Digitech, and it just drops the tuning of your guitar. It is so useful, and we're going to use that today. The next pedal we're going to use is this. This is the BD2. And the reason I've chosen to use this is because it's really going to help the amp shine. It pushes it just that little bit further. It requires less gain to get a great metal sound, and overall, I would recommend pushing your amp with some kind of overdrive pedal. If your amp is the kind of amp that it struggles a lot with mids, then I would recommend something like the Tube Screamer. But if your amp is fine for mid content and you just want to push it and get that extra crunch, go for something like this. We're also going to use a couple pedals for bass too. I don't own a bass amp, but I do own a bass. But one issue we're going to come to in recording this is that we're going to have a lack of low end from not using a cab. And the way we fix that is we need a massive bass sound here, so we're going to use a couple bass pedals too. I'm throwing a compressor on there and some bass overdrive to simulate an amp. Both of these pedals together will help create a consistent and powerful bass tone that's going to help merge with the guitar and really carry it. Okay, I'm going to plug everything in and we're going to see how it sounds. Okay, so I've got everything plugged in. What you're about to hear is just the sound of the amp going straight into the DAW. There's nothing else. So there's a couple issues there we need to address. First of all, there is a lot of high-end fizz that just doesn't sound very good. So what I'm going to do here is some EQ in the DAW first. I'm going to add a low-pass filter at around 8K, and that should eliminate a lot of that. I've added the low-pass filter. Let's see how it sounds now. A lot better. This is something you should do when mixing metal music regardless, but here it is even more essential. So the next thing we're going to do is, there's not really a lot of gain right now, but if I add more to the amp, it starts to sound really muddy, really flubby. So I've engaged the BD2, and you'll notice that there's no gain coming from it, and also that the tone is rolled all the way back. This is because the level is enough to push that amp, and we really don't want more high end coming from this pedal. This is already a very bright pedal, and we don't want to push that too far. Way better. That's the amount of gain we want here. So next up, we're going to put it into drop B with the Digitech drop. I'm currently in drop D, but with the click of a pedal, it can sound like this. One last thing I'm going to do to this tone is I'm just going to bump the low end a bit with some more EQ, as we are severely lacking in that department, and any little boost we can get is going to go a long way in the mix. But essentially, that's the guitar tone we're going for here. This will be on the right side of the track, and on the left side I'm going to double track with the SG, just for a bit more high-end clarity. With the limited tools available, you can still create really good sounds. Does this sound like a wall of amps? No. But it doesn't sound half bad. You can totally get a decent song out of this sound. So now that we've got everything set up, let's talk about what we want to do for this song. In the absence of vocals, I will put in some spoken word here, maybe at the start of the song, in the middle, just to give it lore. Because we all love lore in our metal music, don't we now? In terms of the rest of the mix, the drums actually are the easiest part here. I have a plugin for drums, which not expensive at all, and it gave me 3 different types of drums, like a vintage 60s kit, some electronic thing, but the main thing here is that it gave me a metal kit with 3 different snares, and it has been a lifesaver. I don't have to go off paying somebody to do the drums for me now. I can get them in the DAW and they sound pretty much just as good. In terms of the bass, we've gone over that. We need a really good bass sound here to hide the fact that we're not recording anything from a speaker. And finally, for the synths, I've got a little MIDI keyboard that I can use for that. I think most people recording in their own bedroom have MIDI keyboards. If you don't have one, get one. With the magic of editing, I'd like to play for you what I got. Check it out. We failed you. I failed you. I'm sorry.
Your failure. I am your greatest success.
So there we go. I really hope you enjoyed that. So let's reflect here. Let's go through the 3 missions. 1, record, mix, and master to a decent standard. I don't think that was so bad. It certainly doesn't sound like it was done in a studio. You can definitely tell. Like I say, it's not about it being better or worse. It is just different. And I think more people should explore this avenue of making music, as you can get some really unique sounds out of it. Limitation breeds creativity. Number 2, cheap equipment. We've achieved that, you know? Everyone's got an amp at home. I'm sure most of you out there have an overdrive pedal. We didn't really use much else apart from that. And number 3, we didn't upset any neighbors. I haven't had any noise complaints so far, but that's about it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed. Goodbye.